Okay, many organizations have really well-defined governance policies. They will define an area where anybody in the organization can build Power Apps and flows. And this is usually what they call personal productivity. It could be your default environment, or it might be another environment that's purely dedicated to that kind of app making. Traditionally, these kinds of environments are quite closely monitored as well, because you don't want, organizations do not want people to be building the next enterprise level app in a personal productivity environment. And there's a number of ways that they go about ensuring that this doesn't happen. One is that they limit the number of connectors that are available. So you might find that all you can access is other connectors such as SharePoint, OneDrive, approvals, and email. That's more than enough to build an app for personal productivity or a small team. To prevent an app becoming too popular, many of the customers that I speak to put a hard limit on the number of users that they define as personal productivity or a small team. Let's use 20 as an example. And what they'll do is have a flow that detects or calculates the number of users that an app's being shared with. And if it finds an app that's being shared with too many people, usually the IT function or the IT department, the Power Apps admin function, whatever it's called, is notified by maybe an email to a shared mailbox or to a message in a Teams channel. And then it's up to them to go ahead and manage that. Now, this implementation is slightly different. It does pretty much everything that I've just said, so it will calculate the number of users that an app has been shared with. And it does that by simply iterating through the app's metadata. So what it will check is initially for shared groups. So a Power App, when you start looking at the actual object in Power Automate, has two properties that we're interested in. One of them is shared groups count. So this is how many groups an app's been shared with. And the other is how many users, so shared users count. So what we're doing here in this flow is we are setting a maximum value. So in this variable here, maximum shared users, we're setting this to cut off at 20. Now that could be anything, it could be 100, could be a dozen, it could be any number that you decide is appropriate for your organization. And we create a number of other variables that we're going to use later on in the flow. But we get all of the apps in the default environment, and the default environment in this instance is the personal productivity environment. So that's the environment where everybody in the organization has access to it. They can build apps, they can build flows, but there's some pretty proactive governance checking going on to make sure that people stay in line with the behaviors that we've set out. So first off, let's walk down the shared groups. So if the shared groups count is greater than 0, that means it's been shared with a group. We get what we call the role assignments. And the role assignments is a list of all the permissions, essentially, that the app has been assigned. That could be to a person or it could be to a group. And what we do here is we check the type. So this role assignments, again, has metadata, and the value that we want is, the property that we're after is the type. So if it's defined as a group, then what we do is we take that group's ID and we go off and get the group members, we calculate the total number. Then what we do is we check to see if the group count, the total value, the total members in the group, is greater than the total amount that we want to, the limit of sharing. And if it is, then what we do is we send an adaptive card to the app owner, and we let them know that the app that they own is currently shared with too many people. We do the same for let's just continue down this. So what we then eventually do is we add up the total members of the group versus the total number of shared users, because you might have an app that's been shared with both a group and has been shared with a number of users individually. So we sort of get a picture of all of that landscape, and again, if the total is more than the cutoff limit of 20 in this example, then we do exactly the same. We send another adaptive, well, the same adaptive card with just slightly different values. So if the app has not been shared with a group, then we check the shared users count. So this is an app that's been shared with people individually, not with a group. And we take exactly the same approach. If it's greater than the value that we've set, then send an adaptive card. So let's run a test. In my environment, I have either one or two apps that I've shared purely for testing. I think one of them was shared with individual users, and the other was shared with a combination of Azure AD groups and individual users. So let's run this test, and what we should see is an adaptive card being sent to me in Microsoft Teams. Here we are. So this is the first one. So this is greeting me. Hi, Steve. We've detected that you've shared that with more people than we'd like. We have a sharing limit of 20, and you have shared this with 22 users. Now, this is the part that I think really sort of illustrates how useful adaptive cards are for the most important governance processes. I think it would be wrong to use adaptive cards for everything, because then adaptive cards would essentially become an annoyance to a user. But I think to kind of enforce some of the more important policies that you define, such as oversharing, I think adaptive cards is an excellent use. Purely because I don't know about yourselves. In fact, I'd love to see your comments about this. But for me, if I receive an email, there's a tendency for me to possibly shelf it, to put it on one side, and I'll deal with it later. Purely because I receive a lot of email at Microsoft. Whereas if someone sends me an instant message or a chat, I generally stop what I'm doing and look straight away. So that's why I think adaptive cards is an excellent use case for these important processes. Now, I'm given a choice. I can reduce the number of people that I share this with so that it falls back in line, or I can request that the app is moved to an environment where potentially the IT function manage or support all of the apps in the environment, purely because we've set that limit of 20 users to become, that represents what we define as an acceptable number of people to share an app that's for personal productivity or for small teams use. So I can say I want to reduce the sharing, click submit, and that's it. It's up to me then to go ahead and reduce the number of people that this has been shared with. I've just received another adaptive card. As I said, I've been setting this up for testing, so I'll probably stop at this point, but because you get the point. But what we'll do then is select move the app. Now, in this example, this doesn't actually do anything, but what you could do is you could extend this flow so that if the user selects move the app, then it will let the IT function know that the user has selected to move the app. And again, I've got another app here, a combination user and group share. So you can see this is just my test tenant. I've set up a number of apps for testing purposes. So yeah, I hope this kind of approach to processes that you probably already have, I hope that it gets you thinking about there are other ways to do the same thing but get a better result. So if you have a process, what's the compliance like currently? Take a look at it. How quickly do people actually make changes if you detect an overshared app? How do you currently do it? Again, it would be great to see your comments below. So yeah, hopefully this is useful. Thanks very much.